Welcome back to our tier list series. Today we're going to be going over part two of the cars in the $100,000 to $150,000 price range. We're specifically looking at sports cars and exotic cars. Last time we went from Acura to Chevrolet. Today we'll be going to go from Dodge to Mercedes. At Motorenn, we specifically focus on buying, selling, and consigning luxury and exotic cars. So check us out if that might interest you. But that does give us a very unique perspective on these vehicles. Again, I've had an opportunity to be in pretty much all of these cars and just want to share some of those insights with you, kind of how I feel about them. Quick refresher about what the tier list means. Again, we're going from S to D and then with a niche tier. Caveat, none of these cars are bad. I think all of them have the right segment that they really focus on. They have owners and people who love them and want to buy them. These do represent my insights and how I feel about them, and I do think you can take this and potentially help your buying decisions on these vehicles. S tier are vehicles that we're seeing are holding very good value in the market, are really fun and dynamic to drive, and just are very exciting cars. You can't go wrong with buying one of these. A tiers are also great cars, wouldn't really have too much of a second thought in buying one if you find one you like. B tiers, these are cars that are very good. You know, there may be some other alternatives that are potentially slightly better in certain areas, but look, you should be very happy with them. C tier, you may want to reconsider, but if it really fits your personality or your taste, it still probably makes sense. And then D tier, there may be a couple flaws that don't necessarily suit my taste, but if it's something that works for you and at the right price, these modern sports cars are just so good across the board. It's still something to be enjoyed. And then niche, again, there is something that maybe is super strong in a certain area, but has some other flaws that set it kind of off on its own. So without further ado, we'll dive into the tier list. If you do like this type of content, just let us know. Please comment, please like, please subscribe. That gives us the energy and input to continue making this type of content for you. All right, we're going to jump into part two of the $100,000 to $150,000 sports and exotic car tier list, looking at cars made within generally about the last 10, 15 years, a couple of exceptions for slightly older vehicles, and looking at kind of how we would rank them in terms of aesthetics and presence, driving experience, track capability, reliability, and value. Now, I've had the chance to be in pretty much all of these vehicles. We've sold quite a few of these to customers, so we have experience with kind of how customers are reacting to them as well. But do bear in mind, this is an aspect of my opinion in particular, so your taste may differ slightly. And I think, again, even the cars that I'm putting into C and D tier are the right car for the right person at the right price. I think some people will really like them. It's just maybe not exactly my taste, so do keep that in mind. Love to get your comments and feedback and see how you guys think about it and keep the discussion going. If you like this type of content, again, leave some comments and let us know so we can keep trying to create this stuff and as we continue to improve our production quality and our information that we're sharing with you guys. So we last left off with the Corvette, so we're going to go straight into Dodge, and we'll start with the 2023 Dodge Charger and Challenger, specifically the SRT Hellcat Red Eye wide body. Jailbreak or not jailbreak, it's the same thing. And these are selling in today's market somewhere between 85 to 120K. I almost thought about putting them in the lower tier list. They started out a lot higher. We'll talk about that in value in a second as well. Now, it's powered by a 6.2 liter Hemi V8 that's been supercharged to 797 horsepower, 707 foot-pound of torque. 0 to 60 comes in 3.5 seconds and 11.5 second quarter mile, which is a little bit slower than you'd expect, but this car is heavy. I think in the wide body format, somewhere around 4,400 pounds or so. I might be off by 100 pounds or something like this, but it is a big car, and it drives like it's got 4,400 pounds, and you feel every pound of that. That's ultimately what it is. Interior is the same across the entire rest of the Dodge lineup, so it doesn't feel particularly fancy or exceptional on the inside. It's functional. The infotainment works. The seats are comfortable. It's fine. It definitely feels like it's something that belongs more in a $20,000 car versus a $100,000 car. And I get it, Porsche stretches on their 911s from 100K up to 500K, but I feel like once you're in that upper tier, it's more acceptable. When you're trying to stretch a 20K car up to 100K or 150, that ends up being a little more challenging. The track capability is okay. This is not a car I take to a road course. There'll be a lot of other cars at this price point that will be significantly more rewarding in terms of the overall experience and the lap times, because it's got so much horsepower, but it's got so much weight, it's not dancing around the track. At a drag strip, I think this would really shine, especially if you get some drag radials on there, maybe slap a little tune on it, and then all that power just is overcoming the excess weight. The weight's still just going to be a thing, though. Reliability-wise, the recent Stellantis product, recent Dodge product, I think we've been hearing some concerns about the output from the factories. Haven't heard too many crazy things about these in general. And then ultimately, it is a Dodge product where your repair parts should be relatively straightforward and arguably cheap compared to the rest of these cars to buy. So it should be okay. And then value-wise, this is where we've seen a massive change. You know, they started out, people were asking 150, 200K for these. And some dealers and private party folks who had great allocations were getting those on the secondary market. We're seeing that significantly dropping and really kind of going in the 90 to 110, 120K range perhaps. But we're definitely seeing a significant softening there as Stellantis has just like overdone this segment to an extent. So overall, it's not exactly one of my favorite cars. I would put the Charger and Challenger, and I have just a picture of a Charger here, but they're basically the same product. I'll put this into D tier. It's just not one of my favorite cars. I can see why some people like them though. Next, we'll go into the 2008-2009 Dodge Viper ACR. So specifically the ACR from the Gen 4 Viper. These are selling today's market somewhere between $120,000 to $150,000. It's powered by a naturally aspirated 8.4 liter V10, giving you 600 horsepower, 560 foot-pound of torque, 3.5 seconds 0 to 60, and about a 11.6 second quarter mile. So it's a very rapid vehicle. I think it's not exactly super fast by today's standards, but it is very quick, and I think the rest of the chassis kind of speaks for itself to an extent. Aesthetics and presence, it still looks really, really good. It is starting to look a little bit aged, but I think not in a way that's just super obvious from the outside. It's iconically Viper. When you see it, you're like, yes, that is absolutely a Viper. It looks menacing, looks aggressive, has great presence. The lines aren't quite as sharp as some modern cars are, but still looks really, really good. On the outside, there's definitely certain color combinations I really like the white on black with the red stripe motif. Love that in some of these. The interior is massive area for improvement. This car really distilled the idea of, hey, look, this is a race car for the streets, and so we're barely going to get you the street aspect of things. Interior carries a lot of Dodge Neon carryover parts. It's very simplistic. It's very basic. It's barely an interior. So that really kind of does make this significantly more difficult to live with. It's very much so a car you take to on a weekend drive, you take to Cars and Coffee, you take to the road course, but you're not going to try to do a long distance drive on unless you're a masochist. Track capability, these are so capable. Again, they're not putting down the absolute record times anymore because a lot of cars have progressed, but they're so stout and so reliable. You know, Bondurant had these at the race school and they were just running these hard, and what I understand is they held up well. The Tremec is a really good transmission. The V10 is just so stout that it just can keep going with good maintenance. And so I understand they're relatively easy to maintain. You know, your local Dodge dealer may not have a mechanic that's good at working on these anymore, may not even be trained on these, but I think if you have a good European mechanic or a smart mechanic in general, they can figure it out. It's not a hard car to work with. Value-wise, these are holding value so nicely. We've been seeing them appreciate a little bit in the last year or so, even as the rest of the market's been coming down. I think a lot of it's coming from the fact that the Gen 6 ACR is at such a high price. Sorry, not Gen 6. The Gen 5 ACR is at such a high price that it's putting a lot of upward pressure on the Gen 4 ACR because they're effectively the same car when it comes down to it. The chassis the same, the engine is the same, slightly updated across the board. So there's a lot of value in this. I'm a big fan of it. I think the interior just makes it a little bit too hard to live with, to really, really love. So I'm going to put this into B tier. I'm a big fan of it. I would definitely have it over a couple of these options here. I think it's just so cool. Yeah, somewhere in the top third of B tier. Now we'll talk about its successor, the 2013 to 2017 Viper Gen 5, specifically the GT and the GTS, the non-ACR. And there is a GTC, but that's more of kind of like a category of specialization where you can choose a GT or GTS or an ACR under the GTC brand or umbrella. So it's not really kind of a trim in and of itself. And then the other thing is you can get a couple aero packages, which do make a difference on value. The TA 1.0 and the TA 2.0. The TA 1.0 is kind of like a little wicker bill thing in the back and a little bit of light aero. And the TA 2.0 is almost like an ACR light with a pretty big rear wing and a pretty big front lip with some canters, but not nearly quite as aggressive. So you can actually drive it on the street and not scrape literally everywhere. The TA 2.0, I think, is the sweet spot in terms of looks, in my opinion, and not having to spend $250,000 or more. So again, powered by that same 8.4 liter V10, but tuned up a little bit now to provide 640 horsepower, 600 foot-pounds of torque. 0 to 60 stays about the same at 3.5 seconds, and quarter mile stays about the same at 11.5 seconds. I think the main thing with this car is aesthetically, you're getting a major update in the looks. I think it's been very nicely refreshed. The angles are made a little bit more elegant, yet at the same time providing this extremely aggressive stance both from the front and the rear. In the GT, you get the 6-vented hood, which I think is significantly more desirable than the GTS's 2-vent hood, even though the GTS has a higher MSRP because you're getting a lot more leather and creature comforts on the interior. The GT actually tends to resell closer or better over MSRP than the GTS. I think a lot of it comes down to that hood and just kind of really going to the spirit of what the Viper is supposed to be about. The driving experience otherwise is about the same as the Gen 4, pretty rough, but there are significant updates in the interior. The infotainment's actually usable. You have Bluetooth. The seating is a lot more comfortable. The switchgear looks acceptable. It's definitely goes from like to something like, hey, look, this is fine, this is acceptable. I think that's kind of what you're changing there. Track capability, still just as competent, if not more competent than the Gen 4. Absolutely fantastic track car. You don't really need the ACR, all that crazy aero, unless you're just absolutely going at it on the track. I think that the base car is just so competent and just so good, it'll be very rewarding to drive. And reliability wise, same notes as on the Gen 4, should be pretty straightforward to work with. And value wise, you know, we saw these dip under 100, but now we're starting to see them creep up. I think because Dodge isn't making these, because this actually is very unique in the entire Dodge lineup and very unique in the overall car world, these are holding value really well. And I think there's a good opportunity that these will start going up in value as well, especially as people are getting really priced out of the ACR. So this is solidly an A tier vehicle for me. I like it a lot. I'd love to have one in my garage again. I'm going to put this at the top right now. We're going to go into a couple controversial takes here. We're going to talk about the Ferrari lineup, cars that are fitting in the $100,000 to $150,000 range. Bear with me. I'd love to see your comments on these. We'll start with the Ferrari 360, looking at the 2001, 2005 Ferrari 360. Now, this is on the older end of the spectrum that we'll talk about. And we're looking at both the base and the Spider. We are looking at arguably both the F1 and the stick versions of these, and they're selling between $80,000 to $170,000. The upper end of that being some of the stick variants, and the lower end of that being the F1 transmission variants. Powered by a 3.6 liter V8, giving you 400 horsepower, 272 foot-pound of torque, 4.6 second 0-60 and 13.1 second quarter mile. So about the same performance as you're getting out of the NSX, even though NSX is down 110 horsepower. It just goes to speak to how well Acura's made their platform. The 360, though, it's still a very attractive vehicle. I think aesthetically, it does represent kind of this bridge zone for Ferrari, where you have the boxy look of the 90s that was so iconic to the significantly more svelte and elegant look of the 430, 458, and 488 a couple years later. And so I think the 360 kind of sits in this like middle ugly duckling phase where it still looks fine. It still looks good. It's still an attractive car, but just not quite as appealing as the rest of the lineup. And I think that's partly why it's set at the price it is. It's also interesting that the stick shift variants of these are really trading around the 110, 120K range. So there's a premium over the F1 variants, but not as crazy of a premium over the F430 stick variants over the F1 transmission variants of those. And I think that's interesting. We'll talk about that in the F430. I think a lot of it comes down to, again, that the 360 is kind of like a forgotten Ferrari in a way, and it's just not quite as sought after. And the, you know, supply and demand, there's also more of them as well. So that goes a long way into all of this stuff. Track capability wise, I think, you know, Ferrari makes a great track car. They're very capable. They may not put the absolute best laps, but they're mid-engine. They sound fantastic. They have great balance. They're very good to drive. But I would urge caution on it that these are cheap to get, relatively speaking, compared to all these other cars. So if you're saving up for one of these and you take it to track and you have off-road excursion, that repair bill will be mega. So do keep that in mind. Now, if this is just like, hey, look, you have many of these and you're getting one of these because they're fun to knock around, then okay, sure, whatever. But if you're stretching to get this, there's probably significantly other better options out there if you're going to take it to the track, where your repair bill will, like if you have off-road excursion, you're going to have a big repair bill regardless, but this is going to be a big difference between like, hey, look, you just got to walk away from the car versus, hey, look, it is repairable. So do keep that in mind. Reliability wise, it's significantly improved. You don't have to have all that crazy engine out stuff that you had to have in the older Ferraris. It's easier to work with and live with, but these are getting older. These aren't Hondas, these aren't Acuras. So do keep that in mind as you get one. You know, make sure you're going through all the seals and all the rubbers and all that kind of stuff, so that way it doesn't like, you know, kind of grenade itself on you. Overall, it's an okay car. I don't feel super strongly about it one way or the other. I'm gonna put this into C tier. Yeah, it doesn't, you know, maybe that's more my generation, and somewhere in the middle of C tier. It's fine, but I don't particularly love it. All right, the successor to the 360 is the F430, which, to my notes earlier, I think aesthetically it makes a nice evolution forward. But before we go there, we're specifically talking about the base and the Spider variants that have the F1 transmission, not the OEM stick. And, you know, I think we're also talking about the EAG conversion variants as well, because EAG used to be selling closer to the near 200 almost, but since lately with EAG's hubbub or whatnot, that those have kind of fallen in demand a bit. These are trading around 110 to upwards of 170 in today's market, powered by an updated version 4.3 liter V8, now creating 490 horsepower, 342 foot-pound of torque, 3.5 second 0 to 60 and 11.7 second quarter mile. So a significant update in performance over the 360 as well, on top of the aesthetics. And I think aesthetics wise, it looks really good. It looks significantly more elegant, more modern. I think it's aged way better. Interior wise, look, it is going to be dated versus something else. Bluetooth, infotainment, all that's going to be very clunky in this car. Doesn't make sense to look at some aftermarket options perhaps to really improve your creature comforts. But then, you know, for the collectors, they want everything kind of original, so do keep that in mind. The track capability, I think the same notes that I have for the 360. This is very capable, but it's going to be very expensive if you have an off-road excursion or have any kind of issues. So do keep that in mind, but it can be very rewarding if you do have the budget set aside. And then reliability wise, haven't heard too many problems problems with these vehicles. The F1 transmission, I understand there are a couple of weak points to it potentially, so just make sure that's checked out, but it's nothing as crazy as some of the other cars that we're hearing that we'll talk about in a little bit. But in general, fairly reliable, fairly expensive to maintain, have good independent, and I think it's pretty manageable. Value-wise, these are holding value well, it appears, in the low 100s. I don't necessarily see them going up in value. It is kind of more overlooked in the 458 and 488. I think that's where all the energy and attention is right now. But it's still a very, very nice car, and I think it's a car that you really can't go wrong with. So this guy, I'm going to put this into B tier. I think it's a pretty solid car across the board. I think I'd have it over the NSX. It's very cool. I think it has great presence. It's a fun car, and it's going to hold value as well. Now we'll talk about the Ferrari California. So we're looking at the 2009 to 2014 Ferrari California. These are selling between $85,000 to $120,000 in today's market. It's powered by that same 4.3 liter V8 that you have in the 430 and also in the 458, giving you 453 horsepower in this state of tune, 358 foot-pound of torque, 3.9 second 0-60, and 12.2 second quarter mile. So quick, but not super fast. It's understandable because this is kind of a hardtop convertible car. It's more for cruising, but is still very athletic. Aesthetics and presence wise, I think it actually looks really good. It does look a little bit more wonky compared to the rest of the Ferrari lineup, but it is still very noticeably a Ferrari, especially if you get it in resale red. People see it and there's a presence, there's a stance to it that calls out some attention. Not nearly as much attention as, 458s, 430s, 812s, F12s, etc., etc. This isn't the car that's going to get a lot of attention at the Cars and Coffee. What I've noticed is in the Ferrari world, there's a machismo to things. There's a goal to have something with a lot of testosterone in it. And this car doesn't really sell as much testosterone as those other cars. So if you're at the Cars and Coffee, this car's probably going to get overlooked a little bit. What is interesting about the presence on this car and the driving experience of it is that it's actually very easy to live with. I've taken a couple of these home to get them ready for smog, to test them out before we get them ready for sale, and they're just easy to live with. You get the same driver zone you get in the 458, so you get the flappy paddles and all that. It's still just as engaging, the same engine, so it sounds just as good, except now you can get the top down for less than half the price of the 458 Spider, and you get that flat plane crank V8 whale coming out behind you. Most of the time you're driving on the highway anyway, or driving day to day, you're not as worried about ground clearance because it has pretty much the same ground clearance as a BMW 3 Series. It's just easy to live with while giving you most of the Ferrari experience if you can get beyond the fact that Ferrari people kind of look down on it. Now, here's the thing about it. There are certain cars you buy for yourself. The Dodge Viper, you buy for yourself because you're going to enjoy that and you're a car enthusiast. You're going to have it in your collection. You're going to take it to the track or you just want to look at it or whatever you do. There's certain cars that you buy because you actually can enjoy life with it. And this is one of those cars. And I think it's highly underrated for that. My wife will actually get in this car. I bring any of the Lamborghinis or any of the McLarens home, and she's like, what are you doing here? You got to drive for smog? Fine, drive. I'm not stepping into that dang thing. The Porsche, she's kind of like, she can give or take them. For Ferrari California, she's like, hey, you got one in inventory. Let's try to take it out for date night or something like that. The ladies like this car. And, that aside, for my single guys out there who are like, oh, hey, a car will help my dating life, and so I'm going to look at a BMW M3 CSO because it gives me all this cred with the ladies. That never happens. I've had a lot of exotic cars, a lot of sports cars. Never, ever has happened. Ever. Those just attract guys. You're at the gas station pumping. It's just like a swarm of guys come say, cool car, bro. That happens. Ferrari California, though, it's a repellent for the guys. And it seems like every single time, 100% of the time, 60% of the time, I'm getting approached by an age-appropriate lady saying, hey, nice car in the Ferrari California. And it's definitely not me because it doesn't happen in any other circumstance except for when I'm driving a Ferrari California. It's the car. So keep that in mind. Track capability wise, I think these are very capable. They're fun to drive on a windy road. They're very capable. I don't necessarily know these are something you take to Willow Springs or something like that. Reliability wise, hey, look, just watch out for the 2009, 2010 variants. That transmission has some known issues with the rear main seal and some of the components. Ferrari's going to try to set you back $50,000 to $60,000 for full transmission replacement. There are vendors out there that will do a repair on it. That's going to cost you between $10,000 to $20,000 or something like this. It's manageable, so I wouldn't be too afraid. And that's why the early ones are so discounted down to $80K or so, and the later ones are closer to $100, $115. I would look out for the California 30 Special. They comes with a special handling package and a little bit more horsepower. It's very cool. It has a silver side gills or vents, if you will. And then value-wise, look, at about $100K, this is a lot of car for the money. You get that iconic Ferrari sound, you get the look, you get the presence. It's relatively easy to maintain and live with. Like, it is all the car for the money at $100K. I think it bats way above its weight class here. Way underrated. I'm gonna put this guy solidly into A tier. I would have it right there in the middle. So controversial take number one right there. I think some people may strongly disagree with me on that. Ferrari California T, I'm gonna go breeze through this one very quickly. Pretty much the same notes as the California, except these were sold between 2015 to 2018. 2017. They're selling between $110,000 to $160,000. It's powered by a 3.9 liter twin turbo V8, putting out 560 horsepower, 557 foot-pound of torque. So significant upgrades on the horsepower, about 100 more and about 200 more on the torque. 0-60 drops precipitously to 3.6 seconds, and a quarter mile drops significantly to 11.3 seconds. The only additional feedback here is that, hey, look, you potentially can get Apple CarPlay in this, so your creature comforts improve a little bit, and the infotainment kind of upgrades the same size module, but it upgrades to like higher resolution, better color. Other than that, it's not a big change. I do think that you do get a decent step upwards in terms of forward thrust performance. I don't think you get much more lateral performance or anything like that. But on a car like this, it's already quick enough on a straight line. You're driving on the highway, you're driving a twisty road. It's already like quick enough that I'd say the trade-off going to the turbos and muffling that iconic Ferrari sound is not worth it. I would rather have the lower horsepower and cheaper Ferrari California with that full natural sound than the California T. That's the only thing I'd have to add on that. Otherwise, the notes are all about the same. I think if you're looking at the Cali T, you might as well start trying to save up your pennies to look for a Portofino or something like that. I'm gonna put this guy into B tier. It's nicely B tier, probably on the lower end a little bit. Like, it's still a cool car, but I think you just lose so much with that loss of sound. Last two Ferraris, we'll talk about the Ferrari FF and the 612 Scagaletti. Now, these are also going to be a little bit controversial. So the FF was made in 2012 to 2016. They're selling somewhere between 120 to 165 in today's market, powered by 6.3 liter V12, 651 horsepower, 503 foot-pound of torque, 3.7 second 0-60, and 11.5 second quarter mile. A quick car. Aesthetically and presence-wise, it's a little bit, I don't know, it's kind of a bit of ugly duckling in the Ferrari lineup. It's just a little bit wonky. It's kind of a pseudo hatchback, but you only get 2 doors instead of 4. You buy it because you're kind of like, oh, I can only have one car and I can't fit a SUV and a sports car in my garage or whatnot. So this kind of services both, but I feel like it kind of fails at both pretty spectacularly. Like, if you're in it and you're driving for sporty reasons, you're like, hey, why aren't I in the 812 or the 599? And if you're trying to use it for family purposes, like, it's just a pain to put that seat forward every single time you need to get somebody in the back seat. You're kind of like, oh, why don't I just get a Cayenne or something like that and actually just live with that? It's a little bit funny on that front. Otherwise, look, it is probably one of the cheapest entrants to getting a naturally aspirated V12 Ferrari. Otherwise, the driving experience, it drives like the rest of the Ferraris. It drives really well. The chassis engineers have done a great job. The driving experience is actually very, very good. Track capability wise, this can handle out there. I don't know if it would be my first choice, but it can handle out there. I'm going to quickly get to reliability. That's where the notes are about this car. The PT unit is the weakness. You know, the rear wheel drive variants don't have this power transmission unit, the PTU, but the all wheel drive in the FF does. And that is more a question of when, not if, it will fail on you. And that's about a $40,000 repair or replacement. I think a replacement's going to set you back about $40,000. And again, there are companies out there that'll do a repair for like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 or something like that. It will happen. Those things leak. Once it starts leaking, it gets really bad, and then it's just bad. So other than that, like, they're okay. You still have some of the Ferrari electronic issues and stuff like that. Will give you all the Christmas tree lights when you turn it on, and you turn it off and walk away, and it comes back and it's fine. Kind of a weirdness about all that stuff. Value wise, look, I don't know if these are going to go up in value. I don't know if they're that sought after, but it seems like they are holding well where they are. I think where it comes down to is people do understand, hey, look, this is kind of like a compromise Ferrari, but it is also one of the cheapest entrants into getting a naturally aspirated V12 Ferrari that is relatively modern. And so I do appreciate it for that. Overall, though, I think it's a little bit too compromised for my taste. I put this into C tier. It wouldn't be something I'd like really consider directly for myself, but I can see why some people like them. A lot of the same notes now for the 612 Scagaletti. Again, this is one of our older entrants. These were made in 2005 to 2010, selling somewhere between $100,000 to $130,000, powered by a 5.8 liter V12. Now it's giving you 540 horsepower, 434 foot-pound of torque, 4 second 0-60, and 12.7 second quarter mile. And this is very much so kind of like a brother of the 599 GTE Fiorano. The difference here is that, again, the 612 is kind of made to be more like the family-friendly Ferrari, or people who want to pretend that they're family-friendly by giving you some back seats. I think that does compromise the aesthetics a little bit and a little bit of the performance. And I think that's kind of why this is valued where it is versus the 599 being, you know, about $20,000 to $40,000 more expensive on the resale market than the 612. And I think otherwise, you know, it's fine. Driving experience wise, it's going to drive great. It's going to drive very similar to the 599. It's front engine, rear wheel drive car, very competent Grand Tour. Track capability wise, I don't know if this is my first choice again. Repairs are going to be extremely expensive because of the V12 and things like that. Reliability wise, I understand they're all right. Just stay on top of it. And value wise, I think they're holding flat. I don't have great notes about this car. We had one. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's fine. I'll put this in the C tier as well, behind the 360, you know, somewhere in the lower end of C tier. I'm not super enthralled by that car. Now we will go over the Mustang Shelby, and I've had it in B tier this whole time. Oh my gosh. Oh, there it is. It's right here. I'm going to move it around so you guys can see it. So surprise, surprise. I'm going to put this in the middle, B tier. My notes on it though are, I think it's a great car. Now these are made between 2020 to 2022. Specifically, we're talking about the GT500 carbon fiber track pack, otherwise known as a golden nugget. And there's kind of reselling somewhere between like $90,000 to $120,000 in today's market. It's powered by a 5.2 liter supercharged V8, giving you 760 horsepower, 625 foot-pound of torque, 3.3 second 0-60, and 11.3 second quarter mile. I think what's really cool about this is you get a little bit more aero, so that gives it a lot more presence. With the carbon fiber track pack, you get the carbon fiber wheels, you get that larger spoiler. I think that goes a long way in how it looks. It is a little bit on the heavier side, 4,200-ish some pounds. So I think there is a big demarcation off of the GT350R, which is about 3,600-ish pounds. That supercharger and all that other stuff adds a lot of weight, and the automatic transmission adds a lot of weight to the experience. But it still feels relatively agile. I think the overall experience on the exterior does look nice. The interior is, upgraded Mustang interior. It's okay. It's about the same as the rest of Mustang interior, but it's still a comfortable place to be in. The Recaros are pretty comfortable, a little bit on the soft side for me, but still very comfortable, and I can see where a certain demographic might really like it. Presence is great. People recognize it as it's going by. It's a very good cars and coffee type of car. Driving experience wise, I think it's fine. Look, you get so much more horsepower. I enjoy it more than the Dodge product. It is a little bit lighter. It does feel a little bit more agile. It just looks a little bit more agile as well, even though, the weight differential is only 200, 300 pounds. But that's still fairly significant. What I don't necessarily like about it is the automatic transmission, and I get why they have that with this much horsepower. I think the GT350R is just such a great car. Of the two, I would have the GT350R and do the trade-off on horsepower for that flat plane crank sound and the stick shift. But again, if you want just the hottest of the hot rods on the Mustang lineup, this is it, and I get it. Track capability of this car is fantastic. It sets great times. It's pretty straightforward to work with. I won't be too worried, but I think this will be very rewarding on both the road course and the drag strip. And then reliability-wise, haven't heard any major things about this car. The supercharged engine is pretty well known for Ford. The overall chassis has been something they've been working on for forever, so they know it. It's not like the GT350s where the early year variants of the 350 flat plane crank had some issues, so the 19s and 20s are really sought after. I don't believe there's anything like that going on here, so it's a little bit safer to go throughout the years of this car. And then value-wise, they seem to be kind of depreciating a little bit. You're looking for the carbon fiber track pack, you're looking for the painted stripes, but they're not quite the same iconic collector type of car as a 350R is. And I think long-term, that's going to be how it bears out. I think the 350R will hold value or appreciate a little bit, whereas this one will continue kind of depreciating a little bit like some of the other Shelby GT500s. Some of the older variants are now just around 30, 40K or something like that. It'll be okay. I think you buy the car, you enjoy it, live with it that way. I think it's overall a fine car. So that's why I had it here in the middle B tier. I think it's a good car. Going into the Lamborghinis. We just have one car here, the Gallardo, and there's so many sub variants, 550, 560, 570 Superleggere, and we've only had like one or two come through the dealership. So I'm not as well versed on these as I'd like to be. So I'm skip over a little bit to an extent. At the same time, I think they're very similar in what they are. This is before Lamborghini and Audi really kind of married up and started creating really bangers of products. So there's a little bit of that going on. These cars are selling between $100,000 to $170,000. You're talking about the 550, 560, 570. There's two variants of the Superleggera. It's powered by a 5.2 liter V10. Great looking car. I think it is a little bit dated. The design language was very much so kind of like, it was iconic at the time. I think I recall being of that age and looking at it and thinking it looked really good, but this is a design that seems to have gotten a little bit more dated in terms of when I see it and how I look at it. The overall experience with the single clutch transmission is just a little bit clunky, and I don't know, in the Ferraris it seems to be programmed a little bit more elegantly where it works a little bit better, and the Lamborghini seems a little bit more clunky, at least the ones that we've had and I've driven around. It doesn't quite have as much presence, and I feel like that kind of fails the goal of the Lamborghini. Like Ferrari, you want to show off a little bit, but at the same time, you're kind of like, hey, I'm a collector. Lamborghini is really all about kind of like, hey, I'm showing off a little bit until you're getting to the really old ones like the Countach and the Diablos and stuff like that. It's kind of like, hey, look, the Huracan, you want to have some presence, you want to have a great car. This feels a little bit dated. It's kind of falling on that presence a little bit. Interior is using some really old switchgear. It's just not a great interior to live with. Infotainment, it's an older exotic car, so yeah, not too many notes on that. Track capability wise, I think very similar notes to the Ferrari 360 and 430. Like, you can take these out there. These are very competent. Lamborghini really had their own racing lineup for a while, and these can be done. I do think there are other cars out there that will be a little bit more rewarding, a little bit easier to manage and operate out there. Reliability wise, haven't heard too many notes on these. Again, I'm not as well versed on these. I'm just not as thrilled about them, and oddly enough, we haven't had as many come through, and I think that maybe attests to kind of how the market thinks about them. But there are some cool ones. I do think the Superleggers are super cool. I would potentially consider one for myself. I'm gonna put this guy into B tier, probably towards the back end of it. It's not something, I don't really dislike it, but I don't really have great value on it. All right, next, the one Maserati entrant. We're talking about the 2024 Maserati Gran Turismo, both the Modena and the Trofeo all-wheel drive. These are selling between $110,000 to $150,000, powered by 3.0 liter V6. You're getting 483 horsepower in the Modena version and 542 horsepower in the Trofeo all-wheel drive version. It's interesting, the MC20, I did a video covering that about a month or two ago. I think the MC20s are falling so quick right now. It's interesting, like at this price point with a mid-engine car, nobody can get away with a 6-cylinder supercar except for Porsche. And Maserati is not immune to that. So I almost might need to be including the MC20 in here in a few months. But as of right now, the only car that fits is this Gran Turismo. The rest of the lineup depreciates so rapidly. They start at high MSRPs, but they immediately fall out of that range. And I think this is going to be doing the same thing. I mean, it's a fine car, powered by 3.0 liter V6. So you're kind of losing that whole idea of you're buying a Maserati and getting a Ferrari engine. Although I guess, Ferrari is shifting to V6s, so there is that. It just doesn't feel Ferrari-like to me, though. Aesthetics-wise, it's very elegant on the inside, but using a lot of kind of Dodge, Chrysler kind of carryover parts because they're owned by them. It's another Grand Tourer. I think it sits in this middle ground where it's not quite as athletic and brutish looking as the BMWs, and it's not quite as elegant as the Mercedes is, like the S-Class versus the M5, M8s. It's kind of this middle ground that it's okay. Reliability-wise, look, it's going to be a Maserati product. They don't have a great reputation. It just is what it is. And then value-wise, I think these are going to depreciate. So look, if you really like the style, I get it. It wouldn't be something I have a first choice in my garage. Put this towards the bottom end of D tier. I'd probably pick one of the BMWs over the Maserati. Now getting to a couple of fun cars, the McLarens. These are really cool. We've had quite a few of these and really like talking about them. But so we'll start with the MP4 12C. This is one of the first supercars I ended up ever selling. And these were made between 2012 to 2014. We're talking about both the base and the Spider. They're selling between somewhere about $90,000 to $135,000 depending on the condition and the mileage and all that. It's powered by a 3.8 liter twin turbo V8, and it's kind of same twin turbo V8 that they use throughout their lineup. And I think that's one of the things that is hurting McLaren. Effectively, they have one chassis and one powertrain that they've used since MP4 12C. It just evolved it. And I get it. It's a very good chassis. It's a very good powertrain, but it does make them all feel kind of a little bit bland to an extent. Look, in the MP4 12C, you're getting 590 horsepower, 443 foot-pound torque, 3.3 seconds 0 to 60, and about 11-second quarter mile. This car is super light as well. If I pull up the stats here, it's somewhere around 3,100, 3,200 pounds. It's a lot of power for a very light chassis, and I think it's great. The aesthetics are really cool. It's noticeably differentiated from the rest of the lineup, noticeably differentiated from pretty much all the supercars. It's recognizably a McLaren. You park it somewhere, people are like, oh, whoa, that's a McLaren. What is interesting is just how quickly McLaren moved away from the design language on this car. And they said, hey, look, and we'll talk about the 650S next, but they immediately were like, yeah, let's redo that whole thing. I don't dislike the design language on the 12C. I think it's cool. I like it. It does look a little bit wonky from certain angles, and maybe it looks a little bit cartoony, and maybe that's why they went away from it. But I still like it though. Interior wise, it's simple but usable, and it works. It's not super modern, but the screens that are there are functional. You get the right amount of knobs. It's relatively minimalist, so you focus on driving. I think the interior really works. Driving experience wise, these feel fantastic. They feel so light. They feel so direct, and that's what they are. The hydraulic steering, big horsepower on a light chassis, light carbon fiber tub. Like, it's a great car, and the trick suspension, it keeps the ride very pliant, so you can very much so use it for daily driving in that regard. Although getting in and out of that car is super annoying. The dihedral doors are very cool, but again, the 50th time opening them up as you're trying to get to work or something like that is kind of annoying. So do keep that in mind if you're going to try to use it for daily purposes. Track capability wise, these are super capable. Your repair costs might be a little bit higher, but like, these are very capable cars. We've had some customers take them, tune them, and do all kinds of stuff, and they still can work. Well, that brings us to reliability. We've also heard nightmares. This is also the car I think that really kind of set McLaren's terrible reputation for reliability in the market. Ultimately, these have a lot of problems. Starting from the front, the front headlights will fog up and they'll mold. And so the remedy for that is to take it home, put it in your oven, bake it at 200 degrees, take it out, remove it, clean out the mold, reseal it properly, and then reinstall. So for you handy folks out there, you're going to do a little easy bake at home with this car. It's asinine that this car costs $350K new, and this is something you have to do. The powertrain has issues with cam phasers. If you don't stay up on your maintenance and oiling, like, the cams can get out of whack, and that can be catastrophic for the engine. So you got to replace that once you start hearing some knock and you're getting some issues, engine codes and stuff like that. And that's going to be setting you back $15,000, $20,000 to rectify. The trick suspension, the shocks can leak, and that's pretty pricey to repair and replace. There are a lot of issues with the hoses, the clamps. That's relatively straightforward to repair and replace. It's relatively cheap. We had one, we got it back to the garage, one of the hoses popped and all this fluid spilled out everywhere. We were like, oh my gosh, this car is done. But really, it just, plug that hose back in, get a new clamp, refill fluids, and it's fine. But it does feel catastrophic, and it's very, very concerning. People are always looking for specific McLaren clamps, and those are hard to get. Look, just get a clamp. A clamp is a clamp. There's Iris infotainment, Iris One system, which is absolutely god awful. It's a super cheap Android Android system with on a really shoddy touchscreen, and the touchscreen will go out, and then you have to get a replacement, and that replacement costs like $6,000 to $8,000 in today's market because they're about as rare as hen's teeth for a functional one. I know some people have kind of retrofitted just an Android or Apple Pi, Raspberry Pi or whatever into these systems, and it seems like it works. I think that's probably the direction I would go if I was faced with that. The climate control modules on both doors go out, and those are also like a couple thousand each to work with. There's a lot. And it seems like it goes wrong with every single one of them. But that's also why they're cheap. Like, you're getting a $350,000 car for about $100, and there's so much performance for that package. Value-wise, earmark some repairs. And if you get a good one at a good price, like, these are absolutely fantastic and super rewarding to drive. Look, if it was more reliable, this would be an A tier car. I'm gonna put this into B tier. I think it scares some people off in terms of reliability. I'm gonna put this towards the back end of B tier. You gotta know what you're getting into with these. All right, now the 650S, a lot of the same notes. This was made from 15 to 16. We're talking about the coupe and the spider. They're selling between 135 to 160 in today's market. Powered by a 3.8 liter updated version of twin turbo V8, putting out 641 horsepower, 500 foot-pound of torque, 2.9 seconds to 0 to 60, and 10.7 second quarter mile. Like, mega upgrade in terms of performance. Just a super fast car. By the 720, they really kind of like fixed up the issues with that V8 and the cam phasers and all that kind of stuff. So it's still kind of an issue here on the 650S. So keep that in mind, but it's going to be more reliable. Aesthetics wise, they made a shift on the front. The rear is exactly the same as the 12C. It's kind of like designers are like, all right, look, we hate the front end. We probably hate the rear because we're going to completely throw everything out by the time we get to the 720. But we don't hate the rear that much, and we're low on budget, so we'll just do the front. And the front, though, I think looks absolutely fantastic. I think it's one of the best looking fronts in the entire lineup. It looks like a baby P1. And at the low 100s price point, I think this car works really well. I know I kind of hit on it in the 150 to 300K price point. It seems like they kind of continue to drop a little bit as 720 has been pressured down. And I think as I'm doing this today, it's typically falling under the 150 mark. And at that price point, I think this represents a lot of value. It's a fantastic car. Aesthetics, a lot of the same notes. It's basically like the MP4 12C on the inside, except the updated the infotainment, the Iris 2 system, same system, but the touchscreen actually stays alive, and so that goes a long way. And then the climate control modules on the side, I think, are fine, and then the headlights don't have the molding issue, at least not what I've heard. So the major issues are starting to get rectified here. Driving experience, absolutely mega car, massive horsepower, super lightweight. This is probably one of the most rewarding cars to drive out there for the money. Track capability, super capable. One of my business partners just bought one from out of inventory for himself because he likes the car just that much. Reliability wise, I think, just know what you're getting into. It's going to be better than the 12C. It's still going to be a McLaren. It is what it is. But like value wise, hey, look, for this price point, it just provides so much more performance. I mean, this sold at the same time as the Ferrari 488, and yet the 488 is still selling in the low 200s, and this is selling for about $100,000 less. So I almost kind of think about it as, hey, look, you could have gotten the 488, but you're gonna get this car with way more performance, and you can earmark 100K for repairs and maintenance, and you're still gonna enjoy it way more. Anyway, at this price point, I like the car a lot. I'm gonna put this guy into A tier. I would love to have it in my garage. I would probably have it somewhere right in the middle, maybe right behind the Cali. Home stretch, last car we're gonna talk about for this session. We're gonna talk about the Mercedes-Benz AMG GT R, made from somewhere between 2018 to 2022. We're not talking about the Pro. We already talked about the Pro in the 150 and upwards range because they're selling above that, the 150 mark. The R itself is selling between 110 to 150K, powered by 4.0 liter twin turbo V8, 577 horsepower, 516 foot-pound of torque, 3.6 second 0 to 60, and 11.5 second quarter mile. Again, this is the same V8 that's being put in the Aston Martin Vantage, except in the R and the AMG GT, it's significantly more athletic of a vehicle. There's a convertible and there's a coupe version. Both are very, very good. Aesthetics-wise, I like the AMG GT lineup. I think it is so athletic. I like the Mercedes interior. This is using last generation Mercedes infotainment where you have the knob, but it's in the pad, but it's fine. It's livable. It's not touchscreen, but it's fine. I think it's a B&O sound system. It's just absolutely, Mercedes makes great sound systems. They have the best sound system setup of any manufacturer. So like, this is an athletic car. At the same time, you can really enjoy being in it. I love it. I get my tunes on. It's just banging out bangers, and it sounds so good. And then the engine sounds so good. The burbles are fantastic. Can't say too much good stuff about this car. It's just a lot of fun. You can see the roots where this used to be shared roots with the Viper when Daimler and Chrysler were doing the Viper together. The SLS and the AMG were like offshoots of Viper 2.0, and but Dodge did their own thing and Mercedes did their own thing. You can see how some of the G&A is shared a little bit, but now this is like actually elegant and something you want to live in and be in. Very, very nice. Track capability wise, super capable. Obviously the Black Series set some records and stuff like that. This is the same basic chassis. You're very much so going after that hot rod front engine rear wheel drive experience. You know, do be careful of snap oversteer, but this car does seem to put the power down well. We've had it where you can just get on it and it feels like it just squats down and puts the power down surprisingly well, versus like the M3s, M4s, sometimes I find you lose traction very easily. Even though it's arguably a similar setup, this one just maintains that traction. Reliability wise, they seem to be pretty good. Only a couple of minor things like the cup holder thing tends to break and not kind of snap back. Otherwise, we haven't run into too much issue with these. Value-wise, I think they're kind of stabilizing where they are in the lower 100s. I think it represents a lot of value there. There is a new AMG GT coming out. We'll talk about it in the next session, but that's a fundamentally different car. It's actually more of an SL, and I think once it came out, people realized how much of a differential it is from the outgoing AMG GT. That's actually holding up values on the AMG GT because it's a completely different vehicle, honestly. And so to get this type of experience from Mercedes, you're not going to get it again. At least it's not on their roadmap from what we've seen. And so it is becoming very rare and unique in that regard, and it's very, very cool. Overall, I'm a big fan of this car. This is solidly A tier. I would have the coupe or the convertible, probably upper end of A tier for me. I think it's just a very fun car, very cool car. All right, and that completes part 2. So stay tuned. In the next week or so, we're going to have part 3 to round out the series. And we appreciate you listening. You know, let us know your thoughts, how we can kind of restructure this a little bit better. I know these are a little bit long, but there's a lot of information to cover. We might try to do some shorter variants or something like this in the future as well. Thanks. Bye.